I'm here today in this desolate field in Suffolk to bring you an update on the case of Vicky Hall, which I covered a few years ago on the 20th anniversary of her murder. This is the field where her body was dumped, and we now know that it was dumped here by Steve Wright, the Suffolk Strangler. Her body was found here, where this water's running, which was a common thing that Steve Wright did. He often dumped his victims in bodies of water, which is maybe one of the reasons he managed to get away with it for so long, because the water would wash away DNA evidence. It's quite windy here, so do excuse me if the audio is a bit muffled by the wind. Vicky was walking home from a night out in Felixstowe when, not long after they arrived back at Trimley St Martin, where they both lived, they went their separate ways to their respective homes. A short time after that, Vicky's friend heard a scream. The next day, Vicky's parents realised that she hadn't returned home, so informed the police that she was missing, and sadly a few days later her body was found in that field that I just filmed in Creeting St Peter. And the night before Vicky's murder, another girl had reported to the police that someone had tried to abduct her. They'd stopped beside her late at night when she was walking alone and tried to pull her into their vehicle. A girl called Emily Doherty, and she did report this to the police, but at the time they dismissed her as a silly little girl and told her to forget about it. She gave the police a partial licence plate that she'd managed to remember, and amongst other people that matched with Steve Wright's car at the time. Though the police had no reason at the time to look at Wright as a suspect other than his licence plate matched that partial licence that Emily remembered, but I think it also matched around about 100 other people who lived in the area at the time, because it was only a partial licence plate that she remembered. So they didn't give Steve Wright much attention particularly. I'll go into more detail about Vicky's murder in the video that I made in 2019 on the 20th anniversary of her murder, and I'll leave a link for that in the description below. But in that video I did name Steve Wright as a suspect because of the partial licence plate and a few other reasons. Once again, I won't bother going into it now because I go into greater detail in that specific Vicky Hall video. But the reasons that I thought Steve Wright was involved were all things that you could dismiss as coincidence. They weren't solid evidence. However, the police did manage to recently match a DNA strand from hair that was found on Vicky's body with Steve Wright. And back in 1999, the technology just wasn't there to analyse this hair properly. It might have only been a very tiny bit of hair. I'm not quite sure why the technology before now wasn't able to match it, because Steve Wright's DNA is in the national database. But for whatever reason, apparently the technology wasn't able to match it until the last few years, when Steve Wright was arrested about 2 years ago for her murder.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Victoria Hall, which occurred between the early hours of Sunday the 19th of September and Friday the 24th of September 1999 in Suffolk. Okay, I'm also arresting you on suspicion of the attempted kidnap of Emily Doherty, which occurred around 4 AM on Saturday the 18th of September 1999.
And he was recently set to go on trial, but literally just before the trial was about to start, he came out and admitted it, which kind of shocked me because he still hasn't admitted to the murders of the 5 women in Ipswich. And for those who don't know, Steve Wright, he's better known as the Suffolk Strangler. He's a serial killer who killed 5 women in Ipswich in 2006 and has been in prison ever since. And is never getting out. He got a full life tariff in the UK, which is reasonably rare. But he still has not admitted to their murders. He always gave no comment or dismissed all the evidence as coincidence. So I was surprised that he admitted to Vicky's murder, though it may be that back in 2006 he thought there was still a chance he could get away with it if he just pleaded innocent and feigned ignorance to it, or maybe thought he could get away with it. But at this point in time, he's been in prison for 20 years now, near enough. He knows he's never getting out, so I suppose he's got nothing to lose by admitting to Vicky's murder. And I think he just wanted to avoid a trial, because he's never been a killer who has liked direct attention for his murders. He's kind of shy about it almost. So I think he just wanted to avoid a trial. He saw there was nothing to gain by denying it. And also his father died a few years ago, and I think he had a level of shame with his dad, knowing what he'd been up to, but now his father's dead. I suppose he doesn't feel that shame anymore of his dad knowing the horrible things he did. So I don't think that he admitted it out of the goodness of his heart. I think it was purely selfish reasons. I couldn't find a grave, but there is a memorial plaque here on the wall. But his conviction and admittance that he killed Victoria Hall in 1999 opens up the window of time that we know he was active now. It wasn't just for that 2 or 3 week period in 2006 where he killed the Ipswich Five. We now know that he was at least active in 1999, so it makes you wonder what he was doing in that 7-year period between murdering Vicky and then murdering the 5 women in Ipswich. It also widens his MO, because up until this point he was only known for sure to have killed women that were sex workers. But Vicky and Emily were not sex workers, and even though he didn't kill Emily, he tried to abduct her, and he's admitted to that as well. So chances are that was basically an attempted murder with Emily, and she was just lucky enough to get away. So we now have at least 2 victims who were not sex workers that he targeted. So as well as having a larger time frame that he was active, it now pretty much any woman who was murdered or disappeared in that time period, especially in the East Anglia region, could have been a victim of his. And there were a number of women in the East Anglia region, in Norwich and Ipswich particularly, that disappeared or turned up dead, murdered in the early 2000s. And there'd been a few through the 90s as well, all in areas that Wright was known to frequent, and most of which fit his MO. And I go into more detail about them in another video that I made a few years ago, so I'll link that in the description as well, rather than me repeating myself here. But yeah, there's a number of women who disappeared around East Anglia. Seemingly there was a serial killer at the time, because there were quite a lot of unsolved murders and disappearances in that period of time in the 90s and early 2000s. Can't help think there was a serial killer active. And knowing Steve Wright lived in the area, how likely is it that there was another serial killer with the same MO as Wright, living in the same area at the same time, who then stopped killing once Wright was arrested in 2006? And it's quite unlikely. Another thing that makes me think that Steve Wright had other victims is that even in 1999, he was in his early 40s when he killed Victoria, which is pretty old to become a serial killer. Most people become serial killers in their late teens to early 30s at the latest, not their early 40s. So I'm pretty certain that he has other victims. We've just got to hope that they don't have to wait, and their families don't have to wait another quarter of a century to get justice the way that Vicky Hall's parents had to. But I don't think that Wright will admit to any more murders unless he's pushed to, because he's going to go to trial again. As I said, I don't think he admitted to killing Vicky out of the goodness of his heart. I think it was just because he wanted to avoid that trial. So I don't think that he's going to now start admitting to other murders unless the police find evidence and they threaten to take him to trial for it, and he just wants to avoid a trial again.